If you let them, the project can go out of control. Sometimes you can blame your supplier and say, yeah, I was waiting for some material or for some input from my supplier, and he didn't do his work, and therefore my project is delayed. But what all these things have in common is that you didn't really see it coming. They were unexpected, or at least the size of it or the impact of it could have been unexpected. They're unknowns. So these things mess up our project, and they make sure that our project is delayed. But we also know that timing is extremely important. Especially if you develop products for a consumer market. Customers are waiting for your product to buy, and maybe there are also competitors that are developing a similar product at the same time. Then it's extremely important to be on the market in time. So short development cycles have been the buzzword in many projects, many companies. Making sure that you enter the market just in time, so proficiently, is also extremely important, because you could have some first mover advantage. If you enter the market early, there are customers that are ready to buy your product, and you can maybe steal them away from your competitor. Also, a lot of research has been done that if you are fast, that you're probably also very efficient, so it saves you development costs. So many companies, they have this kind of speed strategy to make sure that they bring their products to market faster than ever, and at least faster than the previous version, in order to remain competitive. But at the same time, these unknowns, they can really cause trouble for you as a project manager. They lead to stress, of course, because you realize that something unexpected happened and you need to deal with it. And usually it means that you need to do more work. More work could mean that you miss your deadlines, you start working faster, maybe overtime, you start making mistakes. These mistakes need to be reworked, and it really, all hell can break loose. Not to mention that customers can walk away if they have an alternative, of course. They think, well, I'm not going to wait for you. I'm buying the product from a competitor. And to try to keep control, organizations often use a phased type of control, or a stage gate, and I'll explain what this means later. Even the project manager that I interviewed a long time ago, who didn't believe in detailed plans, he had this stage gate overall aggregate plan in mind. So what is a stage gate? In a nutshell, you divide the product into various phases or stages. Usually there are 3, but of course companies can have company-specific stages where they would like to have more or even less. But if you look at all the stage gates that are around, basically you see that there are sort of 3 phases. And each phase or each stage ends with a gate. And a gate is a meeting, a very important meeting for projects, where you as a project manager, you present to your client, to your CEO maybe, or your steering committee, what you've done in the previous stage, and if you can get the green light to continue. So it's a go, no-go meeting. The first stage is usually the front end, or it's called the fuzzy phase or the conceptual phase. So here you're not making any details yet, you're just trying to figure out what is it that we're going to do, what kind of product are we going to develop. It's about generating ideas, so like I said, concept development, and you also start to think about, well, who is my customer, what does my customer want, when do I need to be ready in order to time my market entrance. In order to pass the front gate, what you need to do is make sure that the whole fuzziness of this new product that you're trying to develop has been reduced to a great extent. Maybe not completely, but at least at this gate you can present to your client and to your steering committee, this is what we're going to do in the rest of the product. project, and I know how much budget I need, I know how much time I need. So there's a lot of the unknowns need to be solved in this fuzzy front end. Then there is, of course, the development stage. You actually have to develop the new product. You have to design it. Your engineers start working. So this is the phase where the product is designed and the designs are tested and so on. Maybe you make a pilot product. And this stage ends with the go, no-go decision, where you decide, yes, our designs are good, we believe in them, we've tested them, now we are going to actually produce it. So mass production of the product. And that happens in the last stage, the commercialization stage. That stage ends with the you have a product that's ready, and you can start selling it to the customer. So each stage takes time, of course. These stages don't have to be of equal length. Some stages can be shorter, some can be longer. But the whole idea is that you divide the product into phases, stages, with deadlines in between. The advantage of using a method like this is that you sort of keep the pace in the entire project. And this is to prevent what we call the student syndrome. Maybe you know from your time at BI that when you know that you have an exam in December and you start with the semester in September, you're probably not that stressed yet because the deadline is so far away. And some of the times you start working or reading, learning for the exam just a couple of days before the exam is actually there. That's what we call the student syndrome. You postpone your work until you really feel the pressure, and then you start working really hard. It's not the best strategy. So if you give your students, for example, some earlier deadlines already, they had to hand in something at the end of September and another hand in at the end of October and maybe a trial exam in November, then they pace their learning also much better. So they start learning already and reading and preparing in September. And the stage gate process actually does the same thing for projects. These milestones, these go, no-go decisions are so important that you sort of keep the stress at an equal level during the whole project instead of everything at the end. It also helps to manage risks because you don't give the team a huge amount of money already in the beginning of the project. You only give them a piece of the budget to survive the first stage. And then when they show some results, you can say as a CEO or CFO, okay, well, I believe you can get the go decision for the next stage. Now here is the next piece of the money and piece of the budget that you can spend. So it's kind of keeping the pace in the project, but also risk management. But where do these unknown unknowns come in? Because you could make a brilliant plan with stages and you can plan your gates and put dates on gate meetings. But we all know that when these unknown happens, when suddenly new work is discovered or customers have new requirements, that you will probably need more time, not only for the front end, but also for the development, also for the commercialization stage. So how does that fit in with this stage gate approach? And that was actually what became our research question, because if you read papers, books about this stage gate approach, there's some authors, they say that you have to have these stages and gates really, really fixed and not change them at all, because then if you start changing them, it could also lead to a project that's going wild and out of control. But there are other authors that say, no, you have to be flexible because you know that unknown things are going to happen, and every now and then a team just needs more time because of all these unexpected tasks that suddenly were discovered. So there are good and bad arguments for both options, and we really didn't know how to deal with this question, how to answer this question. So that became our research project. And then first, if you do research, you start analyzing previous literature, and we analyze, so what could be the good things about really having this stage gates that are completely fixed, and you don't allow your team to postpone any gate meetings. If they're not ready in time, then simply the project will be cancelled. That's the really hard decision, but some companies use it. So the advantages is it's a very clear message that you send to your team. This is the stage, this is the important gate, these are the deadlines. If you don't make it, you don't make it. It's over. Especially if you're working in an organization with many, many projects going on at the same time. This it makes sense, because if you just start postponing one project, it will have influence on other projects as well. So this could really mess up your resource allocation. So how many engineers are working on which project and so on, if you have many projects going on at the same time. So then it helps to be very clear and very precise in these are the stages, these are the gates, and we're not going to make any changes. Like I said, it also avoids this backloading, this student syndrome, where you just postpone your work until a couple of weeks before the deadline, and then you start working really, really hard. So it spreads the workload a lot better. And that has been found to have a really positive impact on timing, of course, on being efficient, on your development cost, on your sales. But there are also disadvantages, especially when you are working in an unknown or uncertain environment where you know that changes will happen. Then, well, if you're stuck with these fixed stages and fixed gates, you can wait for disaster to happen. Because these new tasks that you discover, they have to be done, and they add workload, and you have to have time for that. And if you don't have time, it increases time pressure. It could lead to all sorts of design mistakes, stress, engineers walking away, getting a burnout, and so on. And this can have a really negative impact on your cost, on your quality, on your sales. So yeah, there can be good and bad things about keeping these gates really, really fixed. On the other hand, the other extreme, giving just all the time in the world to your team, whenever they ask for more time, you just give it to them because you believe that they need it. The good thing about it is that you're flexible. You can adjust. You give the team the time to do all the tasks and to really focus on the quality of their products. And good quality also has, of course, a positive impact on your final sales. Your customers like it if you have a product with a good quality. But disadvantages is it's kind of inconsistent, and all the momentum in the project or the pressure is gone if you just give your team more time every time they ask for it. So maybe first, if they feel the pressure and you give them a couple of weeks extra, there is some relief, but then probably the next move of the team is to have a cup of coffee and to just waste time again. So it could lead to a delayed market introduction of your project, and maybe your customers are not happy with it and move to competition. So this could also have a negative effect. So the answer is probably, as always, or almost always, somewhere in the middle. But then again, where is this middle? It's easy to say, yeah, sometimes you need to be fixed, sometimes you need to be flexible, but can't we do more than that? So as researchers, me and my co-authors felt we need to do more than this. We need to give some specific advice to practitioners. What does it mean in the middle? Does it mean that you have to be a little bit flexible in every stage, or maybe flexible in the first stage and fixed in the other, or is there something else going on? And how does this unknown fit in? What happens if you discover a lot of extra work along the way? Does this impact your strategy? Does this mean that you have to be more flexible or less flexible? All the time, what we're actually trying to do is we're trying to make a trade-off between time and quality. So if if you really believe that fixed gates are the answer and that they work best, probably you're working in an environment where timing is everything, where time is the most important thing, and that you cannot be too late in the market because then you're going to lose a lot of customers. If you think that flexibility is key, that you just need to give your team more time whenever they need it, then probably you think that quality needs to be prioritized. Because if you don't give the team more time whenever they discover new tasks, new workload, they're probably going to cut corners, trying to survive, trying to be ready on the deadline without actually thinking the product through carefully. But the problem is when you start the project, you don't know what's going to happen. That's the whole idea. These things are unknown. So how do you know whether quality is the most important or time is the most important or whether fixed or flexible strategies work best? So only when the project is completely finished, you know exactly how many extra unexpected tasks were discovered. Then you know who your customers really are and if they were prepared to wait for you, for example, if you were delayed. So when you need to make a decision about how am I going to plan this project and what kind of gate timing strategy do I want, you don't know these unknowns, so you can only make a decision based on what you do know. And that's what we call in this paper, we need to measure what we do know, measure the knowns in order to make some decisions about the unknown. And in this situation, this first phase of a project, this first stage, the front end, turns out to be extremely important because that is the stage where you allow your team also to gather information about the product, to make a conceptual design, to talk to potential customers, to figure out what's really going on. Usually, just at the start of this stage, you make your initial plan. You have an idea about, well, I think I need 20 weeks for my front end, and I think I need a year for my development stage, and then 6 months for my commercialization stage. So you have a first idea. So that's what we call the initial plan. But then during this front end stage, you discover a lot of the unknowns. A lot of tasks suddenly appear and are discovered, and you realize what the workload really is. But still, you don't know, of course, during this stage, whether you have discovered all the unknowns. That's something you only know at the end of the project. But you discover a lot of these uncertainties already in the beginning. At the end of the fuzzy front-end stage, you could make a decision about the way forward, about what kind of gate timing strategy you recommend for your project based on everything you've learned during the fuzzy front end, based on the knowns, based on actual things that you can objectively measure during this fuzzy front end. So what are these knowns? What are the things that you can measure? So during this fuzzy front end, you can measure, for example, how many new tasks were discovered. If you start with a work breakdown, with an initial list of things that you need to do in your project on day one, and at the end of the front-end stage, you look at this list again, what are all the things that you need to do, you can see the difference. And you can measure how many new tasks were discovered. Was it 0? That sometimes also happens. Or was it more than 0? Did unexpected surprises come up? So that's something that you can actually measure. You have probably talked to potential customers. You've done some analysis of the market. So you can probably also make an estimate of what's going on with my customers. What are they? How do they behave? What will they do when I'm a bit delayed? Will they wait? Or are they going to jump to the competition immediately? So how important is my market entry timing? And you can probably also say something about surprises that may happen to your project in the future. And that is, if you look at all these surprises that have happened to you in this first stage, you can look at the behavior over time of these discoveries. So, for example, I've drawn 3 hypothetical situations. Let's say that we have a timeline of 20 weeks. That could be your front-end stage. And in this orange line is, on the first week, you discovered already 15 new development tasks that you hadn't thought of before. So these are surprises. Add to your workload. And the second week, you also make a lot of discoveries, but the pattern of discoveries goes down. And just before the front-end gate meeting, so if this is the end of this stage, you see that nothing has been discovered. So this is a clear indication that the fuzziness of this project is being reduced over time, and that most of the surprises have been discovered in these first about 15 weeks. The blue line has a different kind of shape, but also in this blue scenario, you see that at the end of the front-end stage, hardly any new surprises are happening to the project. So you can be, as a project leader, relatively confident that you have discovered the majority of the unknowns. Sort of the situation balances out, or it stabilizes just before the gate meeting. In the gray line, however, something else is going on. Here in the beginning of this stage, you think you've made the right call, the right plan, you don't discover any surprises, you think you're on the right track, and then suddenly problems start coming up. Around week 5, you discover some new tasks, and then week 9, you have 2 new tasks, and then suddenly you really realize, oh, this is what my project is all about. I have made the wrong plan altogether, and I've made wrong assumptions, and it's going to be a lot bigger than I've initially thought. And by the time you are at the end of your scheduled front end and you're working for this important gate meeting, you're still discovering new tasks every day. If this is your reality, then probably after the front end gate, you will still discover new work. It doesn't look like a stable situation. You're still discovering new tasks all the time. So probably if you do manage to survive your gate meeting and you get the go from your steering committee to start developing the product, it is extremely likely that you will still discover new surprises. So even though you don't know how many surprises will happen, you can track the number of surprises that happen to you on a weekly basis. And that's what this graph shows you. If it's stabilizing at the end of the front end, you're probably done with the big surprises, and not a lot will happen to you in the future. But if you're still discovering new things, new tasks all the time, well, you're probably not ready yet. Your project hasn't been unfuzzified or unfuzzied or whatever the good word is. There are still a lot of things that you don't know. So based on measuring these things, following the path of unexpected tasks, and also talking to customers and figuring out how they will behave, we believe that as a project manager, you can make the right call in terms of gate timing strategy and choosing whether you should have a fixed or flexible. So the 2 extremes, completely fixed or completely flexible. But we also thought, well, the balance is usually best. So let's find some kind of hybrid strategy where you use elements of both the fixed and flexible strategy. And because the front-end stage is such an important stage in getting to know these unknowns, we have 2 other scenarios or strategies. And the first one we called the fixed front-end. And that means that you do not do anything about your front-end stage and gate. You keep those dates fixed. But you allow your team, based on all the knowledge that they've gathered during the front end, to make a new plan, a new date for the development and commercialization stage, so the other two stages. So you allow your team one rescheduling option. In the flexible front end, you also give your team one opportunity to make a new plan, so not constantly changing dates, but one time just before the front end gate. But then you also allow your team a little bit more time for the front end if they want to. So in this flexible front end, all three stages can be replanned, but only once. So in terms of a picture, sometimes a picture says more than words. What these four strategies have in common, they all start with an initial idea of how much time do you need for stages and gates. But the fixed strategy doesn't change a thing. So whatever you have made up in the beginning of the project, that's the plan that you're going to stick to. In the fixed front end, you keep the front end gate fixed, but you allow your team some extra time if they want to for the other two stages. In the flexible front end, you can also give your team a little bit more time for this front end stage, precisely because it's such a critical stage, and this is the stage where you discover most of the unknowns. And in the flexible, completely flexible approach, you give your team more time whenever they ask for it. So you can change your schedule on a daily basis even. So not just a one point in time rescheduling, but on a weekly basis sometimes. So in terms of these strategies, the bottom one definitely prioritizes quality, because you really focus on giving the team more time to do their work. And you sort of forget about your deadlines. And the fixed strategy, timing is the most important thing. And these two hybrids are somewhere in between. So what we did to analyze these four strategies and how they work under different conditions, we used simulation. Based on previous work that we did, so we combined a model that we used previously, and we used data from a lot of projects, and we combined the two, and then once we had the model, we started running simulations. So just to make you very, very impressed, this is the model. I will not go through all the details. But you see there are a lot of variables, and blue arrows indicate how they influence each other, and every variable has either a mathematical formula behind it or an actual number. We run 200 different scenarios, so we tried to figure out what strategy is best. So we have these four strategies, that was the goal, which ones works best, but under which circumstances. And so we varied the number of unexpected things that can happen to a project. We also varied the customer behavior. Are your customers willing to wait or not? And also this behavior of unexpected tasks. When do you discover them? Do you discover them relatively early, or are surprises still happening to you in the commercialization stage, so to speak? Also here, I'm not going to present all the scenario results. If you're interested in the results, I'd be happy to send you the paper. But for every scenario, we calculated the overall profit. So if there is a project under certain conditions and we use the fixed gate timing strategy, what would be the profit of this project? If we use the flexible strategy, what would be the profit of that project? And then after we had 200 projects with different profits, we started looking at, okay, so what do we see some patterns now? Can we draw some conclusions? Do we see what works best? And first, the very intuitive results, maybe also a bit boring, but at least it taught us also that the simulation probably works because it presents results that we sort of feel coming. Yes, the fixed gate timing strategy, it works best when there are absolutely no surprises. Well, this is kind of obvious. If your project is completely clear from the start and you know exactly what to do, why would you postpone your gates? So you can actually stick to your initial plan and don't change a thing. The flexible gate timing strategy works best, so gives the highest profit, when all your customers are willing to wait for you. They are extremely patient and they don't care when you're ready, they will always buy your product. Well, then, of course, you're going to focus on quality and you forget about your deadlines and you give your team all the time in the world and you follow this flexible approach. And you can keep postponing your gates whenever you feel like it. So these two situations, they are very extreme. So no surprises at all your customers willing to wait for you. Maybe there are some projects in the real world that can follow these characteristics, but probably the majority of projects have some surprises and have some very critical customers that are not willing to wait. So for these projects, we need a different approach. And what we found is that this discovery pattern that I explained before is extremely important for you as a project manager to analyze. So not only the number of surprises that is happening to you, but also how they behave or when you discover them over time is extremely important. So again, if this is the date of your front-end meeting, your important gate meeting, and you have about 20 weeks to prepare yourself for that meeting, analyze how the surprises happen to you. Is the majority happening to you in the beginning, and then just a couple of weeks before this gate meeting, nothing happens? So you feel that you are in control and that you've discovered everything that you need to know? Or are surprises still happening to you just before the front-end gate? If you haven't discovered any surprises just before the front-end gate, it is best to keep this front-end gate fixed. So don't change a thing, don't give your team more time for the first stage, but allow your team one rescheduling moment. Because you have discovered some new tasks, so you know that the workload is going to increase based on what you initially thought. So give your team one moment to make one new plan for the remaining two stages, the development and the commercialization stage. And then that strategy will bring you the best results. If you are working towards your front-end meeting and you're still discovering new surprises every day, then the best strategy is to give your team a little bit more time for the front-end stage, but also for the development and the commercialization. But only give them one moment to make one time to make a new plan. So don't keep updating your plans all the time, but allow them at least one critical decision point in which they can make a new plan. And this is the flexible front-end strategy. So it actually worked out. So these 200 scenarios, we can summarize it in some kind of decision tree. And it's relatively easy if you consider how many relationships and scenarios and mathematical equations are behind it, that the results can be summarized in this decision tree, where you ask yourself during this fuzzy front-end stage 3 questions. And you only need to have yes and no answers, so you don't have to have a huge project management support system behind you to answer these questions. So the first question you can ask yourself as a project manager or as a team member, did we discover new tasks in this front end? Things that were unexpected? Yes or no? If you didn't, then probably this fixed gate timing strategy is the best strategy. If there are no surprises, just stick to your initial plan and don't do anything about it. So then you end up in this box. If you have discovered new tasks, then ask yourself the second question: what's going on with my customers? Maybe you're working in an environment where you have only one customer, then it's probably easy to figure out. But if you're working for mass production, what does customer behavior look like? Are my customers willing to wait for me if I'm a bit delayed, or will they go to competition and will they be lost? So are your customers willing to postpone their buying decision and wait for you? Yes, well, then you can follow the flexible strategy and just give your team more time whenever they ask for it. If not, if your customers are critical and if you can actually lose them, then ask yourself the third question, that is about this behavior of surprises. When did you discover these unexpected tasks, and how does that look over time? Did you discover the majority in the first week of your project, or are you still discovering new tasks every week? If you're still discovering new tasks by the time you ask yourself this question, then the flexible front end is the best strategy. So give your team the opportunity to replan, and they can make a new plan for all three stages. If you haven't discovered anything yet by the time you ask yourself this question, then probably the fixed front-end strategy is the best. Then you keep your front-end as it is, but you allow your team to reschedule the development and the commercialization stage. So what these simulation findings show is that each of the 4 strategies that we defined, they can work best in certain situations. So of course it all depends on what kind of project you have, but these situations or these conditions of a project are what we call the knowns. These are the things that you can actually measure. Even though you don't know if surprises are going to happen and how many of them, you can at least keep track of them. So that at the time that you have your front end is finished, you can answer the questions: did I discover surprises? Yes or no? When did I discover these surprises? And what is going on with my customers? Are they willing to wait or not? So these completely fixed and completely flexible strategies that are mostly used in the scientific literature, we found that they only work best in really extreme situations. Probably the textbook projects, but not what's happening in real life. So one of these hybrid strategies is probably the best for the majority of the projects that we encounter on in every organization. So I'm opening up to questions now. If you would like to read the paper, let me know. I can send you a copy. If you think, wow, my company also has a lot of data and I would like to experiment with these kinds of simulations, let me know. I can probably do something for you.